So our first speaker this morning is maybe a familiar face to some, but if you are not familiar, his name is Jason. He is from APS, or Applied Performance Sciences, and he works closely alongside John Underwood. And so John really kind of brings in some of those science modules, the sleep, nutrition, mood and mindset, mental wellness, sleep, what did I miss? Chemical health. And APS really has started to bring in that leadership component. So we've had them come in for several years now alongside John to talk about communication skills, accountability. I could think of so many things, team building. And so today we're really going to be talking on building resilience to stress. Jason informed me that this could be a really long presentation, so it is jam-packed and crammed into 30 minutes. So I'm sure it'll be full of really great knowledge that you can take away to kind of help just find tools and strategies to help you during some stressful times. So Jason is also a veteran Navy SEAL, and so I'm sure he'll kind of dive into that a little bit with his experiences. But Jason, we are so excited to have you, and thank you for joining us. I will let you take it away.
Thanks, Kara. Thank you for having me, and thanks everyone for joining. And sorry we couldn't be there to do this in person. Like Kara said, this is becoming a topic that we have to address. It seems like more and more everywhere we go, and even all of the other topics that we discuss. From the training and recovery to mental health to substance use, to all the topics that we travel around and talk about all end up sort of overlapping with this one. And so like a lot of times people will say, can you come and talk, we're having X, Y, or Z problem in our community right now. Can you come in and talk about it? And maybe it's in some places it's we're having a big marijuana problem, some places drinking and driving, whatever it is, and we always sort of say, well, yes, we can talk about those things, but really what we're seeing across the country, and especially in high school and college populations, is like the issue is really stress that is piling on to our students, and it gets to be more and more stress all the time. And we don't really give them tools to understand that stress and manage it, and even potentially use it as a tool. And so all of these other sort of issues that we see arising in communities tend to touch this issue. So you can't really solve those without addressing this whole kind of tangled knot that we think about as stress. And so so we end up talking about stress a lot. It is usually we'll spend a couple hours on it. So I'm going to go through this, and I'm going to try not to get too detailed here, and I'm going to keep things pretty general. And if there are any like neuroscience experts in the crowd, you're going to say, well, that's not true. Well, sometimes this, the dorsolateral prefrontal cortex does. And I understand like what we're going to talk about is pretty general, and what I want to my goal for the next 30 to 45 minutes is if we can get everybody sort of a general understanding of what the stress response is, and then a couple of tools for how to mitigate it or take advantage of it when we need to, and also like why we want to be able to do that. So I'll jump in. Like Kara said, I have some background in the SEAL teams in the military, and one of the first things that we do in our pipeline is sort of an indoctrination into stress, and it's in our initial training, which you see a picture of on the screen now, and it's called Basic Underwater Demolition SEAL Training, and it's basically the idea is that instructors are there and they're just subjecting the students to as many different stressors as they can to see how students respond, whether they can come back from that stress or whether the stress causes them to do things that that mean they can't be part of the program. So that's sort of where I'll start the conversation. I'll start it with just a quick video so people can kind of be on the same page about what the training is, and hopefully it will come through and you can see and hear it. Okay, so hopefully, could you hear that and see that? Okay.
Yeah.
Mine's getting a little bit glitchy, so I can never tell on these things what's coming through. So that's basically like a 30-second overview of 30 weeks of training, and basically, you stay cold and wet and covered in sand, and you carry those boats on your head, and you run around, and it's pretty physically taxing. And there's a week called Hell Week where you just keep moving from a Sunday to a Friday, and you don't get to sleep and you don't get to stop. And there's a bunch of TV shows and books about it. You can find out more. I won't get too much into it, but the point of it is it's really it's an introduction to sort of stress, what we call stress inoculation. And it does a couple things for us. One is it for the people who make it out the other side, it always sort of provides this like a reset point. So you know that you've been exposed to these levels of stress, so that the idea for me in my career, when I went out on deployments, wherever I was in the world, however stressful a situation was, I really didn't see anything in the real world on any deployments that was more stressful than what I had experienced in training. So you always have this idea that, like, okay, it's been worse for me before and I was fine, so I know I'm going to be fine now. And that sort of helps. It's one of the tools that can help you mitigate that stress response. And so usually, like, at this point, people say, okay, well, what does this have to do with me? Like, I'm not staying up for a week straight. I'm not covered in sand and carrying logs around, and no one's shooting bullets at me. And my point in showing that is that it actually does apply to you. It applies to everyone who feels stress. So usually when I'm with a group of students talking, I ask, who in here is stressed or gets stressed during the school year? And usually every hand in the room shoots up in the air, including coaches and teachers, and students usually throw both hands up in the air. And so, the point is that everyone is pretty stressed right now in our society. And students particularly tell me that all the time that they're really stressed. And I agree. I think that right now, this generation of high school students is the most stressed out we've ever seen. And I don't know how they're managing it. When I always say, like, when I was in high school, I was pretty stressed out, and we didn't even have the internet yet. And so, like, you've got our students now have a million different things to deal with from the time they wake up early in the morning. Maybe they have to get to a job. Some places we go, they got to go and work on a farm for a couple of hours before they go to school. Then they got maybe get an early weight room session in. Then they got to go to class, and they got to take tests, and maybe they get some lunch somewhere in there. And then they go and they take more class, and then they have to get to practice, and their blood sugar is low because they just ate a little bit for lunch 3 hours ago. And they go to practice, and they are subjected to more,
up, right?
more physical stress.
Oh, no, can you go to your Wi-Fi settings?
I'll make sure to mute everyone.
So they're jumping from activity to activity and under a lot of cognitive load. under a lot of mental stress, and then having to train and compete is all this physical stress. And then after that, they go and they got to do their homework, and they got to, violin lessons and karate ninja class and whatever they have to do to become competitive nowadays to try to get into college, and 1,000 things. And then they go home, and then there's family stuff and relationship things, and then they're on the phone with their boyfriend or girlfriend, and then they get in bed, and now they're on their phones looking at, I don't know, cats playing piano on YouTube. And all this stuff is just stress all day long. And now we've also, on top of all that, we've got to be connected all the time, right? The students now are stressed out about, like, okay, what am I going to post, and what did someone else post, and I got to look at what they post, and I have to comment on their post, so they're going to comment on my post, and I'm going to post this, and what's everybody going to think? And so there's this whole other vector for stress that I didn't even have. And now, I always ask students, like, okay, what's stressing you out right now? What are this? And they always say that the things that I had, the homework and sports and practice and all that stuff. But now it's, one kid was like taxes. I think it was like an 8th grader. But now it's like cyberbullying, and kids are stressed about, is someone going to walk into my school with a gun and start shooting people, which is another thing I never thought about. But from my recent conversations in the last couple of weeks, that's something that students are thinking about. And so there are all these stressors, and our students are feeling them. And my point is that, like, the reason that's all this talk about SEAL training and the stress that we go through is relevant is because when it comes to stress and the physiological response, like what our brain and bodies are doing during stress, our bodies and brains don't discriminate between like sources of stress, right? So stress is all relative. And so, like, for me, I'm afraid of heights. Usually I like to take a poll in a room and ask who's afraid of heights, and like usually less than half of the people raise their hand, which always surprises me, because like, we're supposed to be afraid of heights. We're supposed to be afraid of things that can kill us. And so for me, I'm pretty afraid of heights. It's one of my bigger fears. And yet, like, in my career in the Navy, I was always having to like jump out of things and off of stuff. And so for me, that was like really stressful, right? Like being in a plane and watching the Earth get far away and looking out and knowing, like, okay, pretty soon I'm going to be back down there without this plane. And for me, like, that was pretty terrifying. So I would get that what everyone would recognize as like that stress response, the sympathetic nervous response, which we'll talk a little bit about in a couple minutes. So for me, that ride up in the airplane is all about like trying to figure out how to quiet that response, right? And so that I could perform. And it's the same thing. So my point here is no matter what the source of the stress is, like what's stressful to you might not be stressful to me, or your parents might be stressed by something, or they might think the thing that's stressful to you is silly to them, and you just shouldn't be worried about it. But the point is, stress is stress. So whatever the stress you feel, whether it's from, I've got to take a really hard calculus test that I know I didn't study enough for, right? That stress response that starts to kick in is identical to the thing that's happening inside my brain and body when I'm standing in the door of that airplane and about to jump out, right? So stress is stress, whether you're scared or you're nervous or you're too hot, you're too cold, you're too hungry, whatever it is, stress, the chemical cocktail that starts happening in your brain, and then all the cascade of activities that happen inside of your body as a result are the same. So stress is stress is stress. So the tools that I can use to manage that stress under the situations that are stressful to me are the same tools that anyone can use to manage anything that is stressful to them at any time. So when we talk about stress with our students, it's really we're concerned about two things. One is this is the Human Performance Project, right? So we care about performance, and so one thing is that acute stress. So like when it's a tied basketball game and I've got to go up to the free throw line and there's 1 second left in the game and I get up there and now my nerves start to kick in, right? And I'm shaking, my breathing gets funny, I get butterflies in my stomach, I get all those signature physiological things that we associate with stress or being anxious. All that stuff starts to happen in that moment. So then can I use my conscious mind to silence all of that, make that stop in the moment so I can perform, but then also over time, so that's the acute stress. It's like stress in the moment. Can I overcome that so I can perform whatever task is in front of me? And then the other side of it is there's chronic stress, right? Which is like over time, when we're in a stress response all day, every day, that's chronic stress, and that's bad for all of our body's systems, and it leads to not only degradation in our ability to perform, but also has pretty significant long-term health impacts. And they're seeing that stress is now being tied to basically every health issue that you can identify, from obesity to diabetes to heart problems, hypertension. I think you muted me.
Yeah, sorry.
So being in that state of stress all the time is associated with all these like really bad health outcomes, and we want to avoid those also. So what are things we can do? Let me so talking first about acute stress, I want to show you this video. If you've ever heard me speak before on almost any topic, you might have seen this. I show it to pretty much everyone that I speak with, because I think there are a lot of lessons here. So I'm going to show it to you first. I call it Elite Performance Under Stress, and then I'll talk about a couple points.
You're gonna jump. Whoa, my feet looking off. No snow house. Okay. Great. Do you go faster on the in run? A little bit. A little bit? Yeah. Is it any steeper, do you think? Not much. Just longer. Just longer. Just a bigger 20, that's all. Bigger 20. I got it. Just the suspense at the top of the first time freaks me out. That's the only thing. It's so fun. Huh? 60 seems like nothing now.
Okay, so I like that video for a lot of reasons, but I think it's the application here is what we just saw, and that was a 9-year-old girl, and she's going off of a 60-meter ski jump for the first time. And so like she's practiced before on a 20-meter, and now she's moving to the 60-meter, and eventually she moves on to those big ones that are terrifying if you go up to the top of them. And so what we just saw there is like a case study in acute stress management. Like she just did this thing inside of her 9-year-old brain in real time that we just got to watch, that showed her going from that, that anxious stress response to gradually quieting that in her mind, and then executing this task that she was really scared to do, that was really hard. And we'll talk about like some of the steps that she uses, but I realized like that's a thing that like what we just saw her do is what I spent many weeks in sniper school trying to learn how to do, right? So like I was a in the SEAL teams, we have our own sniper school, and I think probably from my class, probably 25% of the guys who went didn't make it through the course to become snipers. And it's not because they weren't good enough at shooting, it's because they couldn't figure out how to use their conscious brain to do the things she just did inside of her 9-year-old mind. So we'll kind of dissect that a little bit. But when it comes to stress, these are two brain scans. So on the left is like a brain that's calm, and on the right it's a brain that's under stress. And you see that the red there is levels of activity. And the point here of showing this is not to say that like one is good or one is bad, or we should try to always be in the calm state, but our brains can do this for a reason, right? Our brains can shift between these states for a reason. So like the brain on the right is a brain that's in the middle of trying to solve some hard problem, right? Maybe has a hard physical task or mental task in front of it. And so our brains need to be able to do that. Like if you think about, for all the athletes that there, you can think about the things that you do in your sport, like, or in your training, like think about that second pull of your power snatch pretty much fires every motor unit inside your body. So like every place where a nerve is attached to a muscle is activated in that motor pattern. So like your whole central nervous system is lighting up when you're doing that, and you need to be able to do that. Or you think about having to sprint down a basketball court or sprint down a football field, right? We need to be able to recruit that ability within our brain and our physiology. So our bodies have the ability to do that. And then the key is then, at the end of the day, when it's time to go to bed and our head hits the pillow, then can we shift back to the left side here, right? And so the idea here is our brains have the capacity to be in these different states and to be anywhere in between. But then the question is, like, can we bring our brain there when we need it to be there? And instead, what we see is like, our students wake up in the morning, like we said, they go through their 1,000,001 different activities, from school to practice to weight room to jobs to homework to families and relationships. And so we're just living on the right side here in the stressed out brain side. We're living there all day long. And then, at night when we lay down and it's time to go to the left side and go to the calm brain, we're laying in our bed staring at the ceiling, and we're thinking about all the things that happened today and what's going to happen tomorrow, and what are people going to think, and what are people going to say, and what am I going to do, and what did I do today, and should I have done that differently, and what, like, all this stuff. And now we're laying there in our bed, and we should be in the left side brain here, but we're stuck on the right side, right? And it's just going, right? And our brains are just going. And so I don't know if that sounds familiar to anybody, but that's kind of what I hear from high school students now. And so then, can we move between those states or anywhere in between when we want to? And so just kind of like what I was saying, there's I don't know, can you see my pointer there on the screen?
Yeah.
And so there's, for any given task, there's an optimum level of stress you need to meet that task. In fact, the reason we have the stress response is, it evolved in humans because we needed the ability to deal with something difficult, right? So if you think about our ancestors walking around, they come out of their cave and there's a saber-toothed tiger there. They need the ability to deal with that threat, right? And so that's when, that's the classic sort of fight or flight response that people talk about. So there's an optimum level of stress for any activity. And so the question is like, and it's also different for different people. So the question is like, can we get to the level we need for the activity that we're interested in at any time? So if you think about like a track athlete, right, a sprinter, and they go down to get in the blocks, and maybe they're super amped up. They're in this high state of arousal. They're amped up. They're ready to go. They're nervous. Everything is firing, and they get down in the blocks, and they're jittery, and then they jump and they have a false start, right? And they're somewhere out here, right? They've got a high level of stress. They're experiencing a high level of stress, high level of arousal, but their performance is low. So they're like in this bottom right-hand corner, high stress, low performance. The flip side is like someone rolls out of bed, they wander up to the track meet, they're yawning, they haven't really quite woken up yet, they haven't warmed up, they get down in the blocks, the gun goes off, and they're like, it takes them 3 seconds to even register that happened, right, before they get out of the blocks. And that's low stress, low performance, and really like the optimal state is somewhere in between there. And that's true for all tasks and for all people. So it turns out we can use our thinking brain to modulate on to where we want to be along that curve. And so there are a couple of ways to do that. And if we think about this we'll think about this as simply and generally as possible. Think about you have your sympathetic nervous system, and that is what is generating that fight or flight response, right? So you see your brain, so down deep inside your brain, there's some structures in here that have evolved over time to protect us from threats in the environment, right? So your sympathetic nervous system this stuff is sensing a threat, and it starts firing, and it's giving us, it's sending signals out to our body to do certain things. It's generating certain hormones, norepinephrine and cortisol. It's causing, blood, glucose to get dumped from our liver into our bloodstream. It's priming big muscle groups to be active. It's also taking resources away from other systems temporarily. And so we have that's our sympathetic nervous system. It's all those things firing together. And that's what sympathetic means. It's not like we feel sympathy. Sympathetic means together. These things are acting together. And then the flip side of that, we have a parasympathetic nervous system, and just think of that as the reverse, right? So everything that our sympathetic nervous system does to elevate that nervous feeling, the parasympathetic is the reverse. It calms us down. And it turns out like our inside of our brain, so very simply, we have these structures here in our limbic system that perceive threats. And that's sort of like the very primitive sort of emotional center of the brain, right? We feel strong emotions like panic and fear there. And then this part out here, and this is like what most animals have this, like this is like the reptile brain. And then kind of the part that makes us human is all this stuff out here, this sort of the neocortex. And this is where human things happen, like critical thinking and reasoning and logic, and high level executive function happens here in particularly the prefrontal cortex. And so if you think about a time, like if you've ever been out in your yard working in the garden, and you kind of out of the corner of your eye, you saw a snake in the grass, and you jumped, and your heart skipped a beat, and your blood pressure went up, and you started having that sympathetic nervous response, right? Oh, there's a threat in my environment, and your this system here in the middle here, where your amygdala is, it actually gets signals from the environment a little bit faster than the rest of your brain. It's developed that way to protect us. And it's also biased toward negative things, right? It's looking for negative things. It wants to find, it's there to protect you, right? So it has a bias for threats. And so you're working in your garden, you see the snake, you jump, you have that sympathetic response. And then you look and realize, oh, that's not a snake, that's the garden hose. And then you calm down, right? Your blood pressure goes back to normal, and that your parasympathetic system kicks in and reverses that, and it evens you back out. And so what you just did in that scenario is you used this high level thinking brain to impose top-down order on that emotional brain, right? So we can do that. We have the capacity to do that. So some of the things that can go into overriding that response, and I saw this on in some article. It said like the Navy's big four, how Navy SEALs manage stress, and I was like, okay, I've never heard that before. This is nonsense. And then I started reading it, and I was like, oh yeah, it actually is kind of is true. These are things we do, and so these are just like four things that are pretty helpful in managing the acute stress, and a lot of them have to do with either trying to regulate that nervous response or with removing uncertainty from your environment. So it turns out one of the most stressful things for the human brain is uncertainty. The human brain hates uncertainty, and there is a bunch of research on this, and the research shows that human beings will actually make decisions that are against their best interest if it eliminates uncertainty, right? If it resolves uncertainty, which is crazy. So one of the things we know we can do to make a situation less stressful and to allow us to make better decisions under stress is to remove uncertainty as much as we can from the equation. So one thing we can do for that is to have clear goals, right? We set clear goals so that it's stressful to walk into a situation without knowing what you're trying to get out of it. And so having a clear goal, understanding what our desired end state is going to be when we start doing something, that removes uncertainty from the equation, and that takes stress away rather than trying to figure out what the airplane should look like while you're flying it, right? Another one that's related is mental rehearsal. So like I was telling you about jumping out of airplanes, for me, that was one of the scariest things to do. Some guys really like it and they're into it and they're high-fiving and they're getting excited on the way up. And for me, it was the ride up was just me going through a series of actions with my arms like this and this and this and this. And because I knew that like at a certain altitude, my arms have to do certain things in a certain order. As long as they do those things, then I get to land back on the ground and survive. And so I don't want to be thinking about those things for the first time while I'm plummeting through space and going, wait, was it supposed to be 2,000 feet or 1,500 feet? And then what do I do first? And then which arm does this? And do I pull this side or this side? Because that makes a pretty big difference. So like for me, I'm just practicing that as many times, just getting as many reps in on the way up in the plane as I can, so that like when the time comes and I see, okay, I'm at that point, I've got that mental rehearsal done, right? Again, just removing that uncertainty and automating like the necessary tasks. You also see this like with Olympic athletes and like with bobsledders. You'll see them before they're going down the track. Or with like skiers in the Olympics, you'll see them at the top of the hill with their eyes closed and going like this and shifting their weight and moving. And in their mind, they're going through what it's going to feel like as they go down that bobsled run or down that ski hill, and what they're going to have to do at different times so that they're not thinking about it. They're not responding for the first time when they're actually in the moment and have to perform. Number 3 is also a big one, and it's positive self-talk. And when I first started hearing about this, I thought like, okay, this is a little bit woo-woo. It's just kind of out there. But then I look in the research, and there's a lot of science behind this, and really it turns out like we as humans we talk to ourselves all the time. We say like 300 words a minute to ourselves. And it turns out that like whether most of those words are positive or negative impacts performance outcomes. And so like really all those words that you're saying to yourself all the time, they become like the source code for the operating system that's up here. It's so going into a thing and saying positive things, and this is the kicker, you don't even have to believe those things. Just saying the thing, just saying the positive thing leads to positive outcomes, even if you don't believe it. And that's pretty interesting. Like if you think about what's happening inside the brain, like there's a study that shows between fear and excitement. So like fear and excitement, and usually like if I'm with a group, I say, what's the difference between fear and excitement? You know, you can start thinking about that now. Like in your mind, how do you differentiate? Everyone here's been excited before and everyone's been scared before. What's the difference? And usually we'll kind of talk about this and we start to see like, okay, the difference is, well, when you're excited, there's like something, you think something good is going to happen. You maybe don't really know what it is, but it's going to happen. It's out there. And when you're scared, it's like something bad. You think something bad's going to happen, right? And that really gets to the key, and the difference is really just context, right? So from a neurochemical point of view, fear and excitement are almost identical, right? The chemicals that are firing, that are active in your brain in those two states it's almost the same chemical signature in the brain. And really the big difference is context, right? It's what you're telling yourself, the story you're telling yourself about that situation. And so they did this study with people where when they were scared, they just had to say the words, "I'm excited." And they didn't have to even believe it. Just when you're scared, say the words, "I'm excited," and that had positive impacts on performance outcomes. Okay, and then the fourth thing, and this is really the biggest thing, this is really the link between the conscious mind and all those automatic things that feel uncontrollable that happen in your body in the stress response, and that's breathing. Breathing is the bridge, and I'll kind of explain that here. And I know I'm getting toward the end. I know I'm running out of time, so I'm going to go through this quickly. So we think about our central nervous system, right? We all know our brain. Our brain generates signals that it sends to our body. It tells our body to do stuff, right? So there's this communication taking place between our brain and really all the systems inside of our body. And so everybody gets it. Our brain can send a signal and tell me to reach out my hand and touch something. And then everyone, I think, can also intuitively understand that there's a way that a signal comes from our body back to our brain to send it messages about what's happening in the environment, right? So like my brain can send the signal out to my hand to say, touch that thing. And then there's a way that a signal can come from my hand to say, hey, that's a hot stove, don't touch that, and tell my brain to stop making me touch that. Right? So there's a two-way communication that goes on. And that's important to understand. And it turns out like there are all the time our brain is getting input from the rest of our body to give it information about the state that we're in. And there's a lot of communication going back and forth between the heart and the brain. And it turns out there are I think it's 8 times more pathways from the heart to the brain. So the heart is always sending data to the brain about the state of your body. And so a normal person who is relaxed, their heart rate changes all the time. As we inhale, our heart rate speeds up, and as we exhale, it slows down. And it always kind of moves in this sine wave when we're relaxed, and that's a behavior of a relaxed heart. And something that happens when we're stressed is our heart rate variability goes to 0. And what that means is our brain. So when we go into that stress response, our brain just starts to take stuff over. It says, okay, we're going to be in a fight. I'm going to eliminate the need for my body to do certain things because we got to focus on a threat. And one of the things it does is it just says, I'm going to make sure my heart is sending enough blood out to the body to deal with whatever might be happening. So it sends a signal on your heart, instead of behaving in that relaxed sine wave kind of pattern, your heart just beats really hard and regular. And that is a stressed out heart. And so it turns out what we can do is we can control our heart through our breathing. And so I guess to do it, just to put it as simply as possible, if you breathe, so like a normal adult breathes about 12 times a minute. If you breathe about half that pace and make your exhales a little bit longer than your inhales, you can hijack your heart rate and send it back. Your heart will start to track that respiratory pattern. And so when you feel yourself under stress and you start to breathe in, so maybe say it's 4 to 5 seconds inhale, 5 to 6 seconds exhale, right? It might be a little bit different for every person, but roughly that. You can, when you start to feel that stress response and you start to feel your heart behaving that strong, fast, regular way, start taking those breaths and your breathing will hijack your heart rate. And now your heart starts to behave like a relaxed heart. And now through all those pathways that go from your heart to your heart is telling your brain effectively that, hey, we're relaxed. Your brain is saying, oh, my heart is behaving like it's relaxed, so we must be relaxed. We must not be stressed. And if your brain is not stressed, then guess what? You're not stressed. And so that's kind of I could spend all day on this topic going into the weeds on it, but that's a general overview of how we use, there's a neuroscientist at Stanford, this guy Andrew Huberman, and he puts out a lot of great information. And like one of the things he said that I heard him say recently that I liked is it's really hard to control the mind with the mind. You can't control your mind with your mind. Like what he said is like, whatever you do, don't think about a purple elephant. Right? Everyone just thought of a purple elephant. You can't control your mind with your mind. Like when you're laying in bed and your mind is racing and you start telling your mind to stop racing, it doesn't work. It makes your mind race more. It makes you more stressed, right? We can't control the mind with our mind, but what we can do is we have tools that we can control. Like I can't control my mind with my mind. I can't necessarily control my heartbeat. I can control my mind with my heart, but I can't really just control my heart with my mind. But I can control my heart with my breathing, and my breathing I can control. I can breathe however I want at any time, right? So I can control my heart rate with my breathing, and that can influence the state of my brain. That's extremely powerful. That's the most powerful point of this whole thing. And so breathing is really important, and I don't know if anyone here does any regular like breathing work or meditation. If you don't, you should. We've started in all of our curriculum, we've started working in different breathing exercises. And really it's not even, there are a million different breathing techniques out there that do different things. And there's box breathing, and there's the kind of breathing I was just talking about that has different names. And then there's like the Wim Hof breathing. There's all these different things, and it doesn't matter how you do it, but start doing it. Like when you're laying in bed, just pick a way to breathe and breathe it. But breathe in, hold it for a while, breathe out, hold it just pick a way to breathe, intentionally do it for a little while, and pay attention to what starts happening inside your body. And I can tell you the way that and it happens fast. It happens in a few breath cycles. The way you breathe impacts almost everything about your physiology. And if you start to get tuned into it and feel, just do it, feel what's happening in your fingers and toes and in how your heart's beating and as you breathe in different ways. And you'll start to just get familiar with how breathing affects your physiology. And if you can do that That's sort of the key that can unlock this tool for stress. And I just show this picture because, and I'll leave it here, and then go to questions. But we always, on all of our ops, I was the point man. So like I'd be riding in the door of the helicopter, and we'd go out on these long rides to go to a target. And so, you get a mission, a tasking, and you're going to go, and it's a 2.5-hour helicopter ride over the desert at night, all blacked out, and you're going to do this thing, and you don't know what's going to happen or who's going to be there or whether they're waiting for you, or so it's like a lot of uncertainty, pretty stressful. And like every time 10 minutes into the ride, I turn around and everyone's just asleep on the helicopter. And it's like, because everyone just knows, okay, there's no point in me living out there in that moment right now when I can be here, and I can conserve all of that, all of those resources in my brain and all that energy. And so everyone just kind of does their breathing, slows everything down, kicks up the parasympathetic, and everyone goes to sleep. And then we land, and as we go through whatever the tasks are that are in front of us, everyone has the ability to just modulate their level of arousal to meet whatever the task is that's in front of them at any given time. And you can, as you get better at this, you can just sort of surf that wave, right, and go to the level of stress you need for a given task that you have to perform. I know I'm running out of time, so I'm going to skip a couple things. I'll go to questions if anyone. I think we've got a few minutes left for questions.
Yeah, looks like we have around 7 minutes. So please feel free to either unmute yourselves and ask a question to Jason, or you can always put them in the chat, and we can read them from there for you. Jason, I have a question, I guess, to kind of maybe kick us off. As you're kind of talking about this, it seems like a lot of the conversation that you had started with is kind of the pre-preparation to anticipating that stress, or trying to, get that mindset or the breathing right beforehand. What does maybe like that aftercare look like for you, or examples that maybe you give to students after maybe they've had to go through a stressful situation?
Yeah, so this is actually pretty important. So my point number 3 here is like exercise and recover. And so it turns out, like, how when we exercise our bodies, or like our hearts and lungs and muscles, we go and do a hard workout, then we have to recover. And you guys heard John talk about this in the last couple months, right? If you're going to exercise really hard and put a lot of stress on your muscles, then you need to recover, and your gains happen when you're sleeping and recovering, right? Well, it turns out the same thing happens with stress. Like, so you have like a stress muscle that you can exercise. And so the interesting thing is you can inoculate yourself to certain levels of stress. You can build resilience. So if you, in the same way that we put our bodies through that training cycle, stress, recovery, adaptation, we can do the same thing with our ability to manage stress. And so you do it by going to a stressful place, and then the key is recovering, right? So like doing something stressful, you can go there, get through it, then the key is recovering. And then once you recover from that, now you're resilient to that level. You can go back there, right? And it will be less stressful, and you can go to the next level of stress. And so the recovery part is key. And so some of the things you can do are, well, one is the breath work and meditation here, like number 4, right? You can dump that cognitive load. So when you're under stress, it's like a high cognitive load, they call it, right? So through breathing and meditation, you can dump that cognitive load and start to recover. And you can get the parasympathetic system going, and you can start to recover those systems. And then really the biggest key for after a stressful situation is doing that, so that recovery, but then eventually sleeping. And I think, did you guys do a sleep
Mhm.
module with John.
You
So
did.
you've heard about this. Sleep is the only place where you really recover from stress, right? The stress, when you're under stress, your brain gets really active. It's burning through neurotransmitters and fuel, and it's creating a lot of waste. When all that energy gets created, waste gets generated. Waste. So if you ever like wake up in a brain fog because you haven't gotten enough sleep and you've had a really stressful night, like your brain just hasn't had a chance to clear the waste from the day. And so like that can't happen. There is no mechanism for that to happen when you're not asleep. Right? And it's in like specific points in sleep cycles that happens. So really being able to come through the other end of a stressful situation, digest what happened, and if it's been a group effort, like being able to debrief, and debriefing is a whole other kind of module. But being able to debrief, understand what happened, recover from it, like by calming your brain and your body, and then getting high quality sleep that not only like quantity, but also like linking together multiple sleep cycles through an 8-hour period at night. And then that, if you think about it the same way as recovering from a hard workout, right? Now, the next time you have to get into that stressful situation, you're going to be more resilient to it.
Mm-hmm. Thank you so much. Kathy, I just wrote in the comments, she just said that she liked the question you posed about excitement versus fear. I think a lot of our student athletes struggle with this distinction. So.
Yeah, it's not just student athletes. I think it's everybody. But really, a lot of like so much of what we get stressed out about is really just down to the story that the story that we've told ourselves, or that we've been told our whole lives, and the story we're telling ourselves in that moment. We can just really reframe how we're looking at that stress response, and that's really like number 2 here is framing that. So we said like our ability to have that stress response is really a tool. It's something that we developed over time. It evolved because we needed it. And so like understanding that, okay, I'm feeling this stress response happening, but maybe I need it right now. It's good if you think about that as, okay, this is not the enemy. My physiology here is not my enemy. It's my ally. I can leverage it. If you can recognize it happening and say, okay, this is my body priming me to step up to execute a difficult task, right? That is much different from saying, oh no, this thing is happening to me and now I'm spiraling, right? And then there's 2 different ways to understand the same thing, and that context changes everything.
Yeah, good morning, everyone. I just want to start off by saying how excited I am to be here. I know that we were all kind of looking forward to being together in person, but you know what? This works. And I know everyone's schedule gets really crazy over the summer months. So, I just want to thank you for taking the time to hop on the call and just taking the time to be here with us this morning. So, as Kara mentioned, today I'm going to be talking about kind of a general overview of sports nutrition with an emphasis on different functional foods that will benefit competitive athletes. And so specifically, we'll look at how certain foods, when they're regularly incorporated into the diet, can help benefit training and can help improve athletic performance. And so as you can see here, this is our formal agenda. We are a small group, so if we need to spend more time on one area versus another, we can do that. But I did try my best to break our information into 2 different sections this morning. We're going to begin just by first covering some of what I like to call the basics of sports nutrition, and hopefully all get on the same page with how to build an effective athlete plate. And then we'll go into each of the 5 food groups and do a brief overview there. Then we'll spend the second half of our presentation talking about what I like to call those functional foods. And as you'll see in a few slides, there are a lot of foods that fall under that category, but we're going to look at 3 specifically. We're going to be talking about antioxidant-rich foods, foods that contain omega-3 fatty acids, and then probiotic rich foods as well. Before we dive into this first section, since there are quite a few new faces on the call, I want to share just a bit more about my background. So I am a registered dietitian, and I'm also a certified specialist in sports dietetics. And really, that is just a fancy way to say that I do nutrition counseling and education for athletes. I've been in practice now for about 4 years. And during that time, I have had the opportunity to have some really, really wonderful experiences. I do own a private practice here in the Chicagoland area that is Eat Elite. And then, as Kara mentioned, I'm also a sports dietitian at Northwestern University. Specifically at Northwestern, I work with the wrestling team, the baseball team, and the cross country team. So it certainly keeps me busy. And prior to my time in the Chicagoland area, I spent 2 years with Indiana University and did 1 season with the Chicago Cubs Class A affiliate out in South Bend. So yeah, needless to say, it's been busy, but I do feel very blessed and very lucky to have worked with, such a great number of organizations and a lot of wonderful individuals, much like yourself. And before we dive into today, I do want to say one more thing just on that, but in my perspective, in my experience, it really does not matter if you are a high school athlete or if you are a professional athlete. At the end of the day, food is fuel. Food is fuel for everyone, regardless of your athletic abilities. And so my goal is to try and educate and empower our athletes to use that food effectively to help them fuel athletic performance and academic success. And believe me, it is never too early to start working on this, right? It's never too early. If you have aspirations to be a great student or a great athlete, or maybe both, this information, the sooner we can understand it, comprehend it, and implement it, the better off we're going to be. And so I'm excited because we get to start that today. And we will go ahead. I don't want to waste anyone's time, so we'll go ahead and dive right in here. But the first topic that I want to introduce to our group today is how to actually build a balanced plate. And this might seem like a super basic, super like duh kind of answer, but I think there's a lot of misinformation out there when it comes to nutrition. In fact, if you were to go right now and ask 10 different people how to build a balanced, healthy meal, I guarantee you that you would get 10 different answers, right? Because it means something different to everyone. And that's okay. But for my athletes or for my active individuals, there are some common themes that we want to make sure that we're always incorporating into our meals. And so that's what we'll start with today. So as you can see, I've got a picture on this slide, and it's called the Moderate Training Day Plate. Now, I love this model. I love this plate because it was actually designed by a dietitian at the Olympic Training Center out in Colorado. And it was obviously designed for athletes and for active individuals for them to use. And by athlete or active individual, we can actually specify a little bit more. This plate is going to be ideal for someone who is training or who is exercising for 1 to 2 hours a day at a moderate to high intensity. And so if that describes you, then this is a really great starting point. This is a really great model for you to implement. And so I want to spend now just a minute or two talking about some of the different components of the plate. Why does it look like this? What are the benefits? So if we're looking at that plate, the first thing you may notice is that it's actually split into 3 different sections. In our first top section there, we've got our grains or our carbohydrates. Now this would include foods like pasta, rice, bread, potatoes, etc. And we ideally want that that food group to make up about 1/3 of a plate or 1/3 of the meal, right? Pretty simple. However, we don't want that to be the only thing on the plate. So ideally, we'd also try to pair those carbs with a lean source of protein. And so that's where that picture or that portion of the salmon comes in. Now, you could also use foods like chicken or beef or eggs. If you happen to be vegetarian or vegan, that would be a good place to put your tofu or your beans. But that would be the second component of the meal. And then third and finally, we have that section dedicated to fruits, vegetables, or ideally a combination of the two, right? These are the foods that are going to be higher in vitamins, minerals, and antioxidants. And we always want to get that color onto the plate. So that would make up the remaining portion of your plate. So all in all, it's pretty simple, but I like to use this again because I think it's a realistic model for what food groups we should be incorporating and what the average portion size should look like for most of us. All right, and just to reiterate, a healthy or balanced meal, really, I believe it should include at least 4 out of the 5 food groups. So ideally, we're having a carb, a protein, fruit, or a vegetable, or a combination of both, and then pairing that with some fluids. Now, don't get me wrong, I don't want us just throwing food on the plate and not knowing what each food group does. And so we can actually go in and take a little bit more of an in-depth look at some of these different food groups. And so the first one we'll start off with are your carbohydrates. So if we wanted to try to define a carb and figure out what it actually does, I would give you this definition. It is primarily a macronutrient, and it's going to provide energy to the body. And keep in mind that when we say carbohydrate, there are actually a lot of words that fall under that category, right? Grains, whole grains, those are 2 examples, but also words like sugars and starches and fiber. Those are all technically under that carbohydrate category. So just keep that in mind. Those are words we sometimes use interchangeably. Now, in terms of its primary function, carbs are really cool because they actually act as the primary energy source for our muscles and for our brain. Right? Believe it or not, when we eat foods that are rich or high in carbs, our body is going to digest them, break them down, and then they get stored in the muscle tissue as glycogen. And whenever we are doing any type of high intensity, high output athletic event, so maybe it's running, maybe it's swimming, maybe it is wrestling. I know we've got all sorts of different people on this call, whatever it may be, but carbs are going to fuel and act as the energy source for muscle tissue. And so that kind of explains why I've got the picture of putting gas in the car. It's kind of a silly analogy, but when we are putting carbs in our body, it is as if we are putting gas into the car or fuel into the tank. And so the more active we are, ultimately, the more carbohydrates we need. Now, thankfully, this is actually relatively easy to achieve for most people because there are a lot of foods that are high in carbs, right? You can see my list here. This is not extensive by any means, but foods like pasta, oatmeal, cereals, any types of bread, bagels, or muffins, and then even some of our more, dessert type foods like cakes or brownies or candy, those would fall under the carbohydrate category too. Our second food group that we had on the plate, if you remember, was lean protein. Now, in terms of a definition, again, there's probably a lot that you could use, but I like to define protein as another macronutrient, but this one has a bit of a different purpose. This one, instead of being our primary energy source, this one actually helps build up cell structure and helps contribute to the cell's unique function. Protein can be used as an energy source, but really the body tries to prevent that from happening. This really only occurs if we are in a period of fasting or in a period of starvation, which hopefully that's not the case, right? So in terms of the primary functions, you guys are probably familiar with quite a few of these, right? We know that protein is going to help build and maintain our muscle tissue, but it does go beyond that. It actually provides structural support for all cells. It helps to initiate different biochemical reactions that we see throughout human metabolism. And then it also helps to support the immune system. And so I don't know about you, but I'm a big lover of analogies. And so I think of proteins as like a construction worker or maybe a contract worker, right? Somebody who goes in and takes a damaged or basically a damaged structure and helps to build it up into something that is sturdier, something that is more durable, and something that is going to be beneficial in the long run. So that's kind of how I like to think of this type of nutrient. When it comes to different food sources, I like to break it down into our animal-based proteins and our plant-based proteins. I just think that's the easiest way to remember. But your animal-based proteins would be foods like beef, chicken, fish, pork, and eggs. A lot of your dairy products would fall under the protein category. And then we have our plant-based sources, right? So tofu, tempeh, different nuts, seeds, beans, legumes, etc. And then finally, thinking back to our plate model from that first slide, you'll remember that our third and final section on the plate are our fruits and our vegetables. Now, obviously, these are 2 different food groups, but in terms of the nutrient profiles, they tend to be pretty similar. And so I'm going to talk about them together and a little bit interchangeably. But each fruit and each vegetable, it has a unique nutrient profile. But one thing they all have in common is that they're going to provide our body with things like vitamins, minerals, fiber, water, and antioxidants. Keep that word antioxidants in your mind because we will be looking at those more in depth in a couple of slides. But the primary benefit to fruits and vegetables is that it helps reduce inflammation and it helps promote healing. It also helps to decrease our long-term disease risk, which I know as high school athletes, maybe we're not always thinking about, but by building up the habit now, it helps to promote our long-term health or our longevity. I think a really cool fact about a lot of fruits and vegetables as well is that the color will actually tell you something about the nutrient profile, about the health benefit. So if you're looking at my chart here at the bottom, you can see that our blue and our purple and our red fruits and vegetables, these actually have the highest levels of antioxidants. All right, they're going to reduce inflammation in a very powerful way. They also contain different phytonutrients, different vitamins, like for example, vitamin A, and they have a lot of different health benefits and health functions. Additionally, these are just a few examples here, but our white fruits and vegetables, so that would be foods like our mushrooms, potatoes, bananas would probably fall in that category too. But these are all foods that are known to help boost immunity, right? Keep us healthy, help us fend off diseases and illnesses. They also happen to be great sources of potassium, and they contain a lot of B vitamins. So lots of benefits there. And then finally, one more example, our green fruits and vegetables. I think most people know and have been told for a long time that these are always healthy foods, but specifically the green ones are going to help promote better digestion, right? They contain a lot of fiber, they contain vitamin C, they contain vitamin K, so lots of good digestive benefits there. Now, one question I often get, I think especially this time of year as more produce is coming into season, people want to know what the best way to get fruits and vegetables is. I usually like to say they're all good. So whether you are using fresh fruit, frozen fruit, even canned is fine, dried fruits, even 100% fruit juice, these are all perfectly acceptable ways to try to increase fruits and vegetables throughout your day. And just out of curiosity, you guys can unmute yourselves, but does anyone know how many servings of fruits and vegetables we should be looking for in a day? Anyone want to take a guess, take a stab at it?
3 to 5?
Of each or together?
Yes, no, it'd be more than that. Yeah, never mind.
No, you're good.
Fruits, but yeah.
Yeah, ideally, at least minimally, we want 3 servings of each. I know, again, you can find a lot of different recommendations there, but if we have at least 1 fruit and 1 vegetable with each meal, that should give us 3 servings of each, or about 6 total. And so as we get a little bit older, as our bodies mature a bit, that number goes up, and we are actually looking for more like 8 to 10. But in the high school population, 6 to 8 is kind of that sweet spot. All right, our last food group, and then we're going to move on to our next topic, but I do want to take a moment and just briefly talk about dairy products. Now, you might have noticed from other presentations people have, but there were no dairy products listed on the plate model, right? That was the one food group that was left out. And I don't think that was intentional. I think it just actually has to do with the realistic application, but a lot of individuals, they end up consuming dairy more as a snack. And there's totally nothing wrong with that. But I do want to be very clear that for individuals who are between the ages of 12 and 20, we really do want to try and consume 3 servings of dairy a day. And the primary reason for this is because in the American diet, dairy products like milk, cheese, and yogurt, those are actually the best sources of calcium and vitamin D. And these are incredibly important nutrients for helping to strengthen bones and teeth. We also know that dairy happens to be a good source of protein, so it will help with recovery and muscle health. And then it also contains B vitamins, which from a metabolism standpoint are needed for energy production. So usually the follow-up question here as well, there are a lot of different milks out there. I don't know if any of you have wandered through the dairy aisle at your local grocery store, but it is extensive and it is quite frankly confusing. But from a nutrition standpoint, I generally do just recommend traditional cow's milk. It is well balanced with calcium, vitamin D, and protein, and it really contains those nutrients in the ideal ranges. However, if you can't do regular milk due to an allergy or an intolerance, my next best recommendation would be to simply do a lactose-free milk, right? So I've got a picture of the Fairlife milk down there. That is a personal favorite of mine. I'm not sure if you've tried it yet. If you haven't, go try the chocolate milk. It is amazing. You'll never go back. And finally, you know, if you cannot do milk at all, again, maybe that's just due to an allergy, could be a religious preference. We would be looking to have a, oh, nice, Kara's tried it, sweet. If you can't do dairy at all due to an allergy or religious preference, what we'd be looking for is a fortified soy milk. So the Silk brand actually does a really nice job of replicating all the nutrients you'd get in milk, in Real's milk, and putting it into a plant-based form. And that tends to be the issue with things like almond milk or cashew milk or oat milk. Unfortunately, those products aren't naturally good replacements for milk. And if companies aren't being really diligent in adding those 3 nutrients in, you might be left with an incomplete beverage from a nutrition standpoint. So those would be my recommendations. And obviously, if you need something more specific, you can always reach out to me and we can have a little chat about it. So I will wrap up here just briefly.
Bailey, you do have a quick question too about almond milk. I don't know if there's any additional questions that Becky had in particular about almond milk, but you might have just addressed that with your comment there.
Yeah. Becky, if you want to go ahead and unmute yourself, do you have any more follow-up questions on that or a specific product that you were interested in?
We'll see if she put something in the chat.
Sorry, slides are being a little funny. There we go. Okay. If so, feel free to throw it in the chat. But yes, generally, I'm not a huge fan of the almond milk simply for that reason. So I wanted to give you guys.
Okay, can I ask a question now?
Oh yeah, go ahead.
I've done some research on this particular issue, so that's more from a personal standpoint. I can't do dairy. And I did look into soy milk originally, but I was told that it can disrupt hormone balance, which is why I prefer almond milk over soy milk. Have you read anything about that or seen any statistics that support or go against that logic?
Yes, and that is a great question. So one of the concerns is that if someone is consuming a lot of soy products, then that could be disruptive, particularly to estrogen. That's kind of the concern. However, a lot of those studies, if you go and look at the quantity of soy products that person or that group was consuming, it's typically a lot more than any of us would ever have in a real day. So having 1 to 2 glasses of soy milk in a day, at least from my understanding, has not been shown to have any negative effects in terms of hormone profiles. I think if someone were regularly having tofu, snacking on edamame, and drinking soy milk and having soy yogurt, it could be a different conversation. But anywhere from the 1 to 2 servings a day is not a concern for most individuals.
So when you compare that to almond milk, you're saying it's a better nutritional source than almond milk, even if it has the risk of hormone disruption?
Not exactly. So almond milk, there are a couple of companies that are doing a better job of fortifying the product with calcium, vitamin D, and protein. Just in my experience, most do not. And so if you're able to find a product that has around 8 grams of protein in a glass and has at least 300 milligrams of calcium, then I think that could easily be a great option. I just often have trouble finding a brand that actually does that. And again, in terms of any type of hormone regulation or disruption, 1 to 2 cups of soy milk is not going to be powerful enough to have any type of negative effect. I think that's a great question, though. And it's definitely an emerging topic of research, that is for sure. Does that answer your question?
Yes, I just wanted to know when I'm looking at labels, how to compare. And it sounds like I have to stick with the numbers, 8 grams of protein and 300 milligrams of calcium. Is that what I'm looking at when I'm comparing labels?
Yep, right around there is that sweet spot. That would be comparable to the products that are not listed up here.
Okay, that's helpful. Thank you.
Yeah. So putting all these pieces together, we've looked at our 5 food groups. I think it's really helpful to have a couple of examples of plates that maybe match up, to all of the recommendations we just made. And the beautiful thing is we are all different, and I expect our plates to look different. But these are just a few examples. A couple of these pictures have been sent to me by clients. A couple of them I just found, but I think these all do a nice example or give a nice example of incorporating at least 4 out of those 5 food groups. You'll notice we've got our carbohydrates in the form of rice and pasta and bread. We've got lots of color from the vegetable and fruits. And then we've got protein as well. We've got eggs, chicken, beans, steak, tofu. So the options really are endless. But again, I just think it's helpful to see a few real life examples. And so my question for you is, I'm going to stop sharing here, but take a minute and think, have you recently eaten a balanced meal? If so, what was it? And if anyone has any really good examples, I would love for them to quickly share with our group. I know for me, the last balanced meal I had was last night. I made BLT wraps. So we had our carbohydrates with the tortillas. We had some protein with bacon, and then I put some chicken in there too. And then we had lettuce and tomatoes as the color. So that was my balanced meal. But does anyone else have an example they might want to share?
Last night, I feel like, who's going? Go ahead, Taylor.
Yeah. Oh, okay. For lunches, when I'm in a hurry, I make these things called like nourish bowls, and you do a base of greens and then add a 1/4 cup of rice and a whole bunch of veggies and protein on top.
That sounds really good. You have to send that recipe in the chat. One more example. Does anyone else have one?
I was just going to mention last night I had a turkey sandwich with a side Caesar salad and some oranges.
Very nice. I feel like that was a very colorful plate. That probably looked great. Awesome. Good. Great. I will go back and we will continue, but I appreciate you guys sharing those examples. All right. So now that we've got the basics covered, this is a great launch pad into talking about functional foods. So for those of you who may not be familiar, a functional food is any type of food that has an added health benefit beyond basic nutrition. So beyond just providing calories, beyond just providing protein and carbs, functional foods are those foods that have something a little extra, right? And so we know that just through research and through experience, these foods can be really beneficial to our short-term and our long-term health. All right, a few of those specific benefits include reducing our risk for chronic disease. So we know that people who regularly eat these functional foods have a lower chance of developing things like heart disease or diabetes, even some cancers, which is really crazy to think about. We also know that these foods are going to help prevent different nutrient deficiencies and promote normal and regular growth and development. And then finally, these foods, I'll share them with you in just a moment, but they end up reducing inflammation. And that is a really key health factor, right? Whether it is external or environmental induced inflammation, things like pollution and smoking, right? Those all cause inflammation in our bodies. Could also be self-induced inflammation through exercise or through maybe an injury or an illness. Whatever it is, whatever the source is, we know that functional foods help to bring chronic inflammation down, which is really powerful, and we'll talk about in just a bit more detail in a few slides here. So here is my list. These are some common functional foods that many of us may have seen, may have access to, may already enjoy. It is not a comprehensive list. The list is actually very long, but I wanted to highlight again just some of those key foods that I think maybe most of us would be exposed to at one time or another. So you'll notice lots of fruit on this list, right? Berries, cherries, different citrus fruits like oranges, lemons, limes, etc. We have our dark leafy green vegetables, lots of different nuts and seeds, specifically chia seeds and flax seeds are great examples. And we also have things like beans, legumes, fatty fish, a couple of different dairy products, and then some whole grains as well, things like oats, quinoa, etc. I also want to highlight, if you're looking at the end of this list, we've got different fortified foods. When something is fortified, essentially all it means is that the manufacturers have gone in and they've added a nutrient or a group of nutrients. A really good example is actually that plant-based milk that we were just talking about. So almond milk naturally does not contain protein, and it's not a great source of calcium, but manufacturers can add those 2 nutrients in, and then you've got a more functional food. So it is possible, right? Those foods are not all bad. But different fortified foods, things that you might commonly see would be milk, breads, eggs, etc. So in terms of athletic performance, how do functional foods actually apply? Well, this is an emerging area of research, not only for normal nutrition, but also for sports science and sports nutrition. And so in the next couple of slides, we're going to look at, again, those antioxidant rich foods, omega-3 rich foods, and probiotic rich foods. But we'll kick things off with the antioxidants. So for those of you who may not be familiar with antioxidants, these are considered anti-inflammatory agents that are going to help prevent cell damage inside the body. All right. When we are inflamed, we have what are called reactive oxygen species, ROSs. And these compounds in our body have an unpaired electron, and they go around just wreaking havoc on cells. All right. And the great part about an antioxidant is the antioxidant will actually neutralize that compound. It puts it to rest, so to speak. And that's how ultimately it reduces inflammation. And thankfully, again, there are a lot of foods that are high in antioxidants. Specifically, a lot of our fruits and vegetables make this list. So strawberries, raspberries, cherries, spinach, kale, nuts, seeds, and my personal favorite, dark chocolate. Yes, you know that one is going to make the list. But these are all great options, high antioxidant foods. And so I've already kind of mentioned this, but just to reiterate, so benefits to athletes is that it is going to help reduce any of that exercise-induced inflammation, right? Training and exercising is really good for us, but people who train chronically, people who play competitive sports, that can actually create some inflammation. And so we want to try and reduce that so it's not quite as chronic. We also know that through research, antioxidants can help reduce soreness, specifically delayed onset muscle soreness. That is that soreness that creeps up, not the day after you work out, but like 2 or 3 days later, right? It feels crippling. Anyone who's ever had this knows what it feels like. Antioxidant-rich foods can help reduce that. And then finally, it promotes heart health or cardiovascular health. So lots of good benefits there. Before moving on, I do want to answer one question in the chat here. Is there a specific quantity, for example, of oranges or tangerines, for a soccer player after playing a full game? Unfortunately, no. In my experience, there is not a concrete number or even super reliable way to measure antioxidants. Generally, the recommendation is just that after we're working out or after a practice, we want to include at least 1 to 2 servings of antioxidant-rich foods. So I hope that answers your question. I wish there was a better way to measure it. That would be super helpful. The only food that we actually really know how to measure is tart cherry juice. And so I do want to give you one realistic example of how we do this at the collegiate and the professional level. So tart cherries, they happen to be one of those foods that is researched a lot more than maybe some other foods. And the research shows that it will help significantly reduce inflammation and specifically reduces that delayed onset muscle soreness. And so in order to have that therapeutic dose or get the maximized effect, you would want to drink about 8 ounces of tart cherry juice or about 1 to 2 ounces of tart cherry concentrate. All right, I actually got like our little example here. This is what we've got at Northwestern. It's the Cherish brand, but it is 2 ounces of the tart cherry concentrate. And so after a workout, we quite literally push this in our athletes' hands to help them recover a little bit better. And an added benefit, this is a really functional food, but it is a natural source of melatonin. And so this can actually help promote even more rest and recovery in our athletes during those really busy training cycles. So yeah, really cool. I know personally, I am training for my first marathon and I've got like 3 quarts of this stuff at home because it is not easy and it is effective. So my question for you, what are some other ways you can incorporate more antioxidant-rich foods into your day? Take a minute and think about that one. But what are some ways that you could up your antioxidant game a little bit? George?
Smoothies, you can put everything in one little container and then it's all there for the day.
I love that idea. That sounds very efficient. What are some other ideas? Anything else come to mind?
You could do dark cherries dipped in dark chocolate.
Love that idea. Actually, I'm wondering why I didn't think of that before. You're hired. I like that idea. Awesome. Great. So yeah, again, lots of different ideas, lots of different recommendations. I think the important thing is that we find something that's realistic for us. For some, it might be smoothies. For me, it might be drinking tart cherry juice after workout. For Taylor, it might be having dessert and reducing inflammation at the same time. So I love it. All right, we'll go ahead and move on to our next food group. I know we're creeping up on time here, but our second functional food group that we're going to be looking at today are omega-3 rich foods. So this is probably a term a lot of us have heard before, but I do want to hopefully just provide a little bit of clarity on what the actual benefit is. So in terms of a definition, we know that omega-3 fatty acids, they are one of the unsaturated fats, specifically a polyunsaturated fat. So this is the healthiest one. And the primary function is that it's going to help form the structure of different cell membranes. All right, specifically, we have really high concentrations of omega-3 fatty acids in the brain and in the eye. So those are two of the areas that are most highly influenced by our omega-3 intake status. Now, there are a few different types of foods that fall under the omega-3 category. Really, the best and most powerful are your fatty fish. So salmon, sardines, tuna, mackerel, those are just 4 examples. But those all contain highly concentrated quantities of omega-3s. You will get some omega-3s in different plant-based foods, things like flax seeds, walnuts, and avocados. And so those are great foods to incorporate as well. But keep in mind that the quantities are not as much as they are in the fish. So just something to keep in mind there for a minute. Now, in terms of the benefits to athletes, omega-3s influence our physical well-being in a couple of different ways. Similarly to antioxidants, they're going to help reduce inflammation. So right there, it's a great food. But a second and really powerful, really cool function of omega-3s is that they help to promote brain health. And specifically, they help to promote healing after any type of traumatic brain injury. And so in the general population, that could be people who are, fall victim to an accident, maybe a car accident, work accident, whatever. But in athletics, we know that specifically concussions are very prominent. That is a type of traumatic brain injury. And so we actually have omega-3 protocols for individuals who have concussions to try to get them to recover a little bit faster and hopefully prevent any long-term damage. We also know that omega-3s, again, are going to help promote cardiovascular health, promote heart health. So that's a third benefit right there. In terms of actually implementing this in the real life, I think we have a lot of different options of how to include omega-3 rich foods. I think for a lot of us, trying to eat 1 or 2 servings of fish a week is a great starting point. I think trying to snack on some of those plant-based foods like nuts and seeds or avocados is a second option. But a third and cool option that some of us have are these enhanced recovery shakes. So again, got one here just as an example, but this is a commercial recovery product that is very much designed and marketed for athletics. And in my opinion, it's a very complete recovery option because it contains protein, 20 grams, as you can see on the label. It also contains tart cherry juice. And yes, it actually contains omega-3 fatty acids. Now, the taste I will leave up to you to determine whether or not you are going to be a fan of this product or not. I don't think it's bad, but this can be a really wonderful product for a couple of different people. Number one, it's great for individuals who do not like fish. If you're not going to eat those foods that I just listed, maybe it might be more realistic to try it in a shake form. This could also be a good option for someone who does not like taking fish oil supplements. All right, I'm not sure who's tried them before, but fish oil supplements are they're like horse pills. They're huge. And they're really uncomfortable for a lot of people to take. And so again, I think doing a shake like this could actually be a more realistic option for a lot of people. Do we have any questions on omega-3s before we go to our next slide? I'll open it up real quick. There are small fish oil pills. There are. Do you have a particular brand in mind that you're thinking of?
I could go run and get it. It's in my house. I just have to go find it.
If you want to, go ahead. I'll circle back with you at the end and you can tell us what brand it is. And while he's doing that, we can discuss what type of omega-3 rich foods do you normally have in your house? So think about the inventory in your fridge, in your pantry. What kind of foods do we already have laying around?
I know my family cooked salmon last night, and we always have like canned tuna in our pantry.
Nice. Yes. I'm seeing from Aaron down here, salmon, walnuts, tuna. I feel like those are the big three. Like those are realistic for a lot of people. I know I used to have a lot of avocados, and then they're like $2 for one. So that doesn't happen anymore. But I like the other options we've got. Perfect. Has anyone ever tried this shake before, the enhanced recovery? Okay. I feel like they are not super mainstream yet. They're a relatively new product, but if you have the opportunity, I would recommend it. Just drink them cold. They're not very good at room temp. That's my only recommendation there. So I will go ahead and go back to our slides. We've got one more category here, and then we will wrap up. But I want to spend a minute or two just talking about our probiotic rich foods. This is that third and final functional food that we're going to be discussing today. And probiotics, those can be defined as live strains of bacteria. And these are actually naturally produced during the fermentation process. And from a nutrition standpoint, they're very beneficial to our gut health. We naturally already have bacteria lining our GI tract all the way from our stomach, small intestine, large intestine. And sometimes those bacteria, they get a little bit out of balance and we can get sick as a result. So probiotics help to keep all of the quantities of the good bacteria in the proper amount. So that way we are not getting sick. When it comes to food sources of probiotics, there are very specific foods that are considered great sources. Specifically Greek yogurt, kombucha, kefir, miso, sauerkraut. Those would be some of the top sources of probiotics in our normal diets. And you'll likely notice a theme here too. These are essentially all foods that have undergone some type of fermentation process. That's how you create, and that's how you essentially keep alive these beneficial bacteria. Now, I do use this opportunity to stress that you can buy a lot of different probiotic supplements, but when we dive into the research, we find that a lot of them are generally pretty ineffective. And so if I'm ever going to try to push a food first mantra, it is right now with probiotics. They can really easily be incorporated into the diet through any number of those foods I just listed. And typically it's going to be more effective than just taking a supplement. Now, in terms of benefits to athletes, there are some specific outcomes that we see when athletes are including probiotics in their diet. First and foremost, we know that it's going to help improve general digestion, and then it can help relieve symptoms of IBS and IBD. So if you happen to be an individual or maybe an athlete who is suffering from one of those conditions, there's research to believe that probiotics can help alleviate some of those symptoms. We also know probiotics will help reduce the frequency of traveler's diarrhea. And believe me, I know this is not necessarily a fun topic to talk about, but if you are a competitive athlete, you've likely seen this. You're traveling to a new city, you're traveling to a new town, you're eating at weird places, you're eating at weird times, and that messes with a lot of our systems. We may have constipation, diarrhea, nausea, vomiting, and probiotics can again help bring some regulation to our GI tract and hopefully prevent that from happening. And then finally, probiotics will also help reduce the frequency of respiratory tract infections. So we know specifically anyone who participates in endurance sports, so things like running, swimming, biking, you are more at risk for developing upper respiratory tract infections, and probiotics can help reduce the frequency of actually getting sick. So that's also pretty powerful right there. In terms of real world application, these are just a few of my favorite products. I think Greek yogurt is an excellent option for a lot of people because it's easily accessible and relatively affordable. But there are a few other products that I mentioned too, and these are just a few brands that I personally use and that I use with my athletes. But kombucha is a great source. I like the Brew Doctor. I like the Kavita brand. Kefir, the third picture there. This is that fermented yogurt drink. It is a little bit tangy. It's a little bit tart, but it actually is really, really good in smoothies. That's how personally I tend to incorporate it. And then finally, if you need something that is dairy-free and you really don't like the taste of those other products, Good Belly makes these little probiotic shots. And I actually think they taste pretty good. And so these are now becoming more available as well. Typically, you can find them in most grocery stores. So just a few ideas for you. And finally, my question for you is, knowing what we know now about probiotics, what sports do you think would benefit most from consuming them? What sports are going to benefit?
Full contact sports like boxing and football.
Tell me a little bit more about that. What makes those two sports stand out for you?
Well, the constant hitting and like the ground and pound on the body. You're always hitting someone else almost in every position, whether it's like you're blocking on the offensive line or the running backs getting tackled.
Yeah, I think that's great logic. I think both of those sports would definitely benefit. I saw someone put in our chat here that all sports. I think that's the answer I'm looking for. I think we listed off enough reasons that would apply to nearly every type of athlete. And again, I think there's maybe a little bit of an extra emphasis on any type of endurance athlete there. But also, what about winter sports, right? Winter sports like basketball, those are competing during normal flu and cold and flu seasons. And so in terms of reducing illness there, might be beneficial there. So we are at our time, and that was my last slide other than making everyone review our points. And so I will spare us from that, but does anyone have any questions before we formally wrap up?
I know like when you talked about the plate, you recommended like a third of the plate be carbohydrates, and you didn't really specify the amount of protein. What would you recommend is like a good serving for the moderate athlete?
Great question. Actually, super happy you asked, because you're right, I did not. Generally, that serving size, we'd be looking for about 3 to 5 ounces. 3 ounces is equivalent to the size of like a deck of cards. So from a portion sizing standpoint, that would be kind of the serving size that we're looking for. And usually we also say that 3 to 5 ounces because realistically, the body can only absorb and utilize about 20 to 40 grams of protein in one sitting. And so 3 to 5 ounces of like chicken or beef or fish, it fits that bill perfectly. So great question.
All right, I'm sad I have to step in here. We just have a minute left, but Bailey knows what she's talking about. So if you guys have any other questions, put them in the chat, send them to us and we'll get them over to her, and I'm sure she'll be happy to respond to them. Bailey, thanks for just the information and knowledge you brought. It really is helpful. It makes us think about what we're putting into our bodies and how we're fueling it. So thanks a ton. And just like that, guys, we have finished week 2 of our 3-week virtual conference. And so we are back at it for one more time next Wednesday, June 22nd. I will remind you of a few things. One, it is luau theme, and the expectation is high that you come with some form of theme of luau. And then hopefully everyone received their package with a bunch of goodies in there. We have another Bailey, believe it or not, who's going to be kicking us off, sharing her personal story of growth. And then we're going to finish up with just all of the things that we have taken in, information consumed that has kind of like hit those spots in us that have grown us. And we're going to do something really cool to wrap up our conference and take that with us throughout the summer and into like the next season of life. So if you did not get that package, say that in the chat or email us with your questions for Bailey. And we will see you back here next Wednesday for one more week. Sound good? All right, everybody, have a great rest of your day. Thanks again.
Thank you.